You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some new, not so great news for Donald Trump on the Mar-a-Lago documents case currently being investigated at the DOJ. Can you walk us through what happened here?
Yeah, it looks like there may be a mole at Mar-a-Lago. If you are a defendant or the target of a grand jury criminal investigation, this is probably the last sentence you want to see the New York Times report about that investigation. They say federal prosecutors investigating Trump's handling of classified documents have obtained the confidential cooperation of a person who has worked for him at Mar-a-Lago. Hence, there's a mole at Mar-a-Lago. If you have somebody on the inside, somebody who is close to Donald Trump, somebody who can see, firsthand what he is or isn't doing with these classified documents that long ago should have been returned to the federal government, that is about as directly incriminating as evidence gets.
I guess just as a quick aside before we get into the substance of what this means for the case, how would the New York Times know here? Would it be more likely that the witness themselves kind of presented themselves to these reporters at the New York Times, or is it likely that prosecutors would have leaked this information to reporters?
Yeah, that's a great question. Leaks can come from various sources. So, in my experience, Brian, and I'm not just taking up for my fellow prosecutors, rarely do prosecutors leak evidence that is otherwise private by law, secret by law, due to what we call 6E grand jury secrecy rules and provisions. Rarely do FBI agents, the agents who are working with those federal prosecutors, leak information. Most often, it is the witness and the witness's lawyer representing the witness before the grand jury who end up talking, whether intentionally or inadvertently, about their cooperation with the federal prosecutors, their appearance before the grand jury. Because an interesting fact is the prosecutors can't breathe a word of what goes on behind those grand jury room doors. The grand jurors are sworn to secrecy. They could be held in contempt if they disclosed what was going on in these secret proceedings. But the witnesses who appear before the grand jury have absolutely no prohibition against disclosing this stuff publicly to friends, to the media. Now, I will say, as a former career prosecutor, we urged witnesses not to disclose what was going on in the grand jury because that could only break bad for both the witness and for the integrity of our investigation. But it was really entirely up to them. And here's the other thing. The attorneys who represent high-value witnesses before the grand jury often love to brag about the fact that they are representing a high-value witness before the grand jury, if only because it might get them more business, and that translates into more billable hours. So those are, I think, the most frequent ways that this information tends to kind of leak out into the public square.
Is there anything that you can read from the tea leaves here that would suggest how much insight this person has?
It's really hard because there wasn't a whole lot of meat on the reporting bones in the New York Times article. But because it's somebody who was not only on the inside of Mar-a-Lago, but somebody who worked with or worked for Donald Trump. Now, yes, everyone who I guess is employed at Mar-a-Lago in some sense works for him. But I have to believe this is somebody who probably had access to, for example, Donald Trump's personal residence, Donald Trump's personal office. Because remember, after the federal prosecutors had subpoenaed documents from Donald Trump, after Donald Trump's lawyers certified in writing that it was all given over, the FBI, when they executed the search warrant, found classified documents in Donald Trump's desk drawers. So it's not like they were, in the far reaches of Mar-a-Lago in some storage room. So anybody who can kind of give the federal prosecutors firsthand insight about what Donald Trump was doing with those classified documents, particularly after they had been subpoenaed by the grand jury, is just a really valuable witness.
And what kind of damaging information could this witness ultimately provide prosecutors with? Like, how could this hurt Donald Trump in this case the most?
Yeah, and there are some hints of this in some of the recent reporting. There is some suggestion that Donald Trump looked through some of the boxes that contained classified information after they had been subpoenaed by the grand jury. And again, there is sort of the hint of Donald Trump sort of picking and choosing what he might want to keep in violation of the grand jury subpoena. And make no mistake about it, that is sort of squarely obstruction of justice, obstructing the grand jury investigation. So I have a feeling the person on the inside might be able to sort of confirm with firsthand observations, yeah, Donald Trump did go through the boxes, did select what he wanted to keep in violation of the grand jury subpoena, put it in his desk drawers. And again, testimony like that would be devastating and would build an even stronger case for, among other crimes, obstruction of justice.
Glenn, people are going to look at this like they have been, and they're going to say Biden had classified documents at his home in Delaware, Pence had classified documents at his office. And so basically, this is just a nothing burger. What do you say to those people?
I say, first of all, that is probably some well-placed criticism. And here's why. No former government official should take with them classified materials when they leave public service. Now, it does happen. High government officials have their offices packed up. They have stuff sent to their private office, to their residence. And, sometimes this is the kind of thing that ends up happening. But here's what's most important. Not that classified documents were in the possession of Biden, Pence, and probably lots of other former government officials. But what did those men do when they discovered they had classified documents? They contacted the law enforcement officials. They invited them to come retrieve the documents. They invited them to conduct searches to make sure Biden, Pence had returned everything that ought to be returned to the federal government, as compared to Donald Trump hiding documents from the federal government and exploiting them in ways that I have a feeling we'll be learning in the future. So ultimately, when you drill down, these two or three, counting Biden and Pence, these three incidents are as different as night and day. And here is really the defining feature that highlights the difference. The FBI presented all of the evidence of what Donald Trump was doing with the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. The judge found there was probable cause to believe that as many as 3 federal crimes had been committed in connection with these classified materials. No judge ever issued a search warrant for President Biden's residence or for former Vice President Mike Pence's residence, but a federal judge did issue a search warrant for Mar-a-Lago.
Now, what charges do you anticipate will result from this, and how serious is this case? Because I know that we're looking at Fulton County and the DOJ's investigation into the events of January 6th as the big cases here, but how serious is this one?
In answering the question, how serious is this? I think it really depends on what the federal prosecutors learn about what Donald Trump did with these documents, particularly whether he was exploiting them for his own financial benefit. So the obstruction of justice, wrongfully violating a grand jury subpoena by, secreting these documents, keeping them for yourself, that is actually a pretty significant crime. Retaining, unlawfully sort of taking or retaining classified material is also a crime, a little bit lesser of a crime. And then I think the potentially most explosive criminal offense is a violation of the Espionage Act by mishandling national defense information. That is one of the 3 crimes that was listed in the search warrant as there being probable cause having been committed. So it really depends. When you ask the question, how serious is this? I think it depends on what the federal prosecutors learn about what Donald Trump did with the documents, not just that he unlawfully retained them.
And finally, I know that we have some insight into how things are moving in both the Manhattan DA's case and to a lesser extent in Fulton County, as we're waiting for that imminent indictment to be passed down or not, the decision on whether to imminently indict to be passed down by Fani Willis. But do we have any insight, any way that you can glean, again, looking at the tea leaves, as to how things are going within the DOJ's investigations into both this Mar-a-Lago documents case and the January 6th case?
I think the most telling data points are, 1, Donald Trump's, one of his criminal defense attorneys, Evan Corcoran, was compelled to testify about, and in a very real sense, against his former client, Donald Trump. And Evan Corcoran removed himself from representation of Donald Trump in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. That is sort of really high up on the evidentiary totem pole. So that would be kind of one of the last stops that Jack Smith would make before he was prepared to ask the grand jury to start considering charges against Donald Trump. And then I think when we move to the January 6th investigation, Mike Pence was probably at the tippy top of the evidentiary totem pole in that case. So by virtue of the fact that Mike Pence was compelled to testify, Jack Smith successfully litigated all of the roadblocks Pence and Trump tried to throw up in front of Mike Pence's grand jury testimony, and Jack Smith won at every turn. That is another data point that they are far down the road in that criminal investigation, maybe not at the end game, but predicting the timing of indictments is a fool's errand. So let me be foolish here for a minute. I would strongly suspect we'll see our first federal indictment sometime this summer.
Okay, well, as we await any information on that or any of the other cases that we're looking on right now, make sure to subscribe if you want to follow along with legal news. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.